Children Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. Today is the 16th of May. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the following. This hearing will be filmed and streamed live. The recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the States Assembly website. All electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. I would ask that any members of the public who've joined us in the room today do not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. So, as for introductions now, I'm the chair of the panel, Deputy Catherine Curtis.
My name is Conitard Mark Labby of the parish of Greville, and I'm the vice chair.
I'm Deputy Helen Miles of St Brelard, and I'm a panel member.
I'm Deputy Maud Scott of St Brelard. I'm the Assistant Minister for Sustainable Economic Development with the delegated authority in respect of data protection, cybersecurity and telecommunications law.
Christoph Riedman, Policy Officer in the Department for the Economy, responsible, among other things, for data protection.
Elizabeth Grumpy, Senior Policy Officer in the Department for the Economy.
Okay, thank you everybody. And the Deputy Kirsten Morale has just been delayed. He'll be with us in a moment. He's the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. So, Mark, if you could actually start with question 3.
Question number 3, thank you, Chair. Assistant Minister, you have advised the panel that the Department for the Economy plans to explore options to provide islanders with the necessary legislation to remove unlawful or intimidating content from online spaces. Please could you tell us more about this work?
Yes, we have been exploring for a while the different options of improving the ability of islanders to have, well, let's just say, undesirable posts taken down. We're very conscious that the data protection law extends to what we call data controllers, and these will tend to be organisations and businesses, and individuals themselves are not subject to that law. And we have been looking into the possibility of extending or amending that law to try and create greater protection, but on legal advice and having looked more closely into this, we have come to the conclusion that we are best to proceed with a separate law, and it would be it wouldn't be as hefty a law as we have in the UK in terms of the Online Safety Act, and there's plenty of reasons why we wouldn't wish to replicate that here, and why it would not be appropriate. We're just being interrupted now. As whilst I was answering the first question, the Minister himself is here. So if you're happy, I'll just continue answering this question about the work that we've been doing in improving the ability of islanders to seek posts to be taken down. The first thing I would say is that the online platforms themselves have terms of use which generally do allow posts to be taken down. You do need to look at where the providers of online platforms are based in thinking about how you would enforce any law that you brought against them. As you may understand, there is a limited extent to which Jersey can legislate for people who are not within our jurisdiction. And even if we purported to, how we would enforce laws against them, particularly when you have online providers with the resources that they do. I mean, I might point out that some of them have got value that might be quite, even more than our whole economy. So what we have sought to do is to give islanders the individual right, nevertheless, under our law, to seek that posts be taken down. And we've sought to do that bearing in mind the Council of Ministers' general strategy not to create red tape, so by duplicating things unnecessarily. It's really there to give islanders the legal right under Jersey law to approach online providers, separate to the terms of use which already apply to them, to request that posts be taken down. So at least they have something to refer to under our own law. By doing that, we can also employ a valuable resource we have in our own information commissioner, whom I understand you interviewed this morning, who does have contacts with online providers and can act as an advocate if should a request not be complied with.
Sure.
One particular feature of the law and what it seeks to do, and I think at this point I really would like to thank the officers here for doing some really extensive research into different jurisdictions, how they deal with online harms. What we are seeking that right should be that posts are taken down pending a determination of whether they offend the skinny law or not. As I'm calling it skinny law. Sorry if that's a bit of a ministerial term, but it's to explain that we need to come up with something that's proportionate for the size of our jurisdiction, whilst giving what we can to islanders to give them that right.
Well, that's good. So is that new legislation then? Will that be a piece of new legislation or amendments to existing legislation?
I believe there is one aspect we're amending the current data protection law. I might need to, I think I'm getting nods here. But in order to give individual islanders that right, we are we're working on instructions to come up with an independent law that gives that right. And of course, we will keep you appraised, or perhaps our colleagues in whoever might be interested in scrutinising, we'll keep you appraised of the progress in that. And of course, you're going to have opportunity to scrutinise that.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any currently any definitions of what would be regarded as unlawful or intimidating? For example, self-generated images and the like?
I think I'll ask one of my officers to answer that, because I've had a very broad discussion on that, and I know that they probably have worked on it in the meantime. So,
Are you referring especially to computer-generated or artificial intelligence pictures?
Well, yes.
Yeah. The issue with that is that most of the laws are technology neutral. That means they refer, for example, is a data subject, as in the data protection calls a person, is the person recognizable? And then it doesn't matter if it's a real picture or an artificially drawn picture or a computer-generated picture. It's applicable. And there was even a judgment of a Jersey court from 2023, where on the basis of AI generated images alone, there was a conviction. So in data protection, the main question is the person recognizable? Did the person give consent?
What about self-generated images? That also form part. I mean, some images are...
So you mean computer-generated images?
No, self-generated that you take of yourself.
oh, I see. So you're saying that if a child
Yes.
is persuaded to post, okay. That's more complex, I believe, because you need to think about, well, the basis on which children even get access to the internet. There's a legal capacity kind of limit. So I believe if children under the age of 13 aren't legally able to contract or release, so they actually shouldn't be on the internet. So at that point, I believe that the approach has to be that, so you are dealing with somebody who actually you have got no legal right to contract with. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, officers might have an answer to this, because I think this is more a question about how you protect children from contracting in that way. And I know that some people might think, well, can't online providers come up with some really whizzy technology, you know, a bit like you might get an off license where you assess the age of the child and you see if they really are old enough to buy alcohol or not. And it's incredibly complicated. And indeed, even then, it probably will not have 100% success. So as part of the conversation, and I'm really glad that the panel is looking into this, I believe part of the conversation has to be how well are parents supervising this respect? Now, I can refer to the charity internetmatters.org, which you've probably heard of. That's the charity, one of the founders is the trust founded by the Duke, the Prince and Princess of Wales. And they found out about 5 months ago that 2/3 of parents had not used parental controls. 2/3.
Could I just stop you there for a minute, though, because we've got more questions later
All right.
about the involvement of parents,
Sure.
and we've got a lot of questions. So if
Okay,
we can
well,
ask more about that
long
later.
and short
would
of
be
it
good.
is that, yes, you know, one has to assess the effectiveness of trying to seek an an online provider that's not in our jurisdiction to provide that technology compared to focusing on how we can educate our own
people.
population.
You've mentioned this separate law, which we did have a question about, but let's just pursue that momentarily. Have you got a timescale for the development of this legislation, and can you clarify if it's in your legislative programme to complete during the remainder of this electoral term?
So we have, as you know, towards the end of any electoral term, there becomes something of a race to get law drafters' time, and we have both myself and the Home Affairs Minister have written to the Chief Minister asking for our legislative requirements around online harms to be prioritised. I don't believe, please don't be wrong, I don't believe we've had that response yet.
Okay, thank you, Minister. The Department for the Economy Business Plan for 2025 states that, and I quote, "We will look to further combine our legislation with an enforcement system that provides faster relief to victims of online harms." Can you explain what any enforcement system might look like?
Well, that's working with the Office of the Information Commissioner to develop exactly that system. They already have successfully established working relations, both formal and informal, with their peers in other jurisdictions, and also with some of the social media platforms that enables them to request the removal of materials at different times. And so it would be building on those sorts of systems.
And if I can add to that, one of the distinctions between what we currently have in the data protection law and what would be proposed in this new law, the current data protection law has a whole system in which data protection authorities work together. This is something new. And so whilst we're trying to use that, if you like, network that's been created to help with the enforcement, it's not as if there is an established legal way of doing that. And we do need to weigh the costs of enforcing legally, of actually going to California or somewhere and bringing a court judgment against actually doing some more work with
I was going to ask, the next question I was actually going to ask is about the funding source. So that would be interesting to hear if any further funding would be required for this enforcement. Clearly it will be.
That's a conversation to be had with the Office of the Information Commissioner. So far, we haven't been told that would be the case, but I think once the law is drafted, then that would give the Office of the Information Commissioner a better understanding of whether they would need further resourcing or not. But so far, that's not been decided.
Because we're hyper aware of the fact that there's many jurisdictions, potentially maybe many jurisdictions involved.
Well, bearing in mind, though, he's received relatively few complaints about online harms, and the current terms of use, most platforms do already provide a recourse. We don't know how well or badly that they're using, but we're not getting too many complaints that they're not honouring their own terms of use.
So we're already looking at quite a detailed collaboration with the Office of the Information Commissioner, which is good to hear. Is the government provided with details about the numbers of takedown requests to the Jersey Officer of the Information Commissioner that he would take down currently?
I believe he provided those, sorry, Minister, it's in the response.
That we've already provided.
Well, in the response, I believe that Joyce provided at the back.
I should have just said yes.
Well, he has, but it's actually, as you said, relatively few. I think it
Yeah,
might be less
there's not
than
very many.
5.
Oh, there was
The
a
table.
table.
Okay.
Don't worry about
Is that the submission to the panel
Yes.
there? Yes, and it's got the table. And of course, we've got that we're asking about is government provided with the details.
it. Yes. So we can see that the number of complaints received last year was 82. The year before was 80, and the year before that was 58. So
However, most of them weren't in
They're
terms
not
of
specifically takedown requests.
Yes.
though.
no,
Exactly,
no, not specifically,
exactly. I
but
mean-
where breaches were determined.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
with that.
you know, so if you had a local business that, I don't know, provided a distorted image of a child or misused personal data relating to child, they would be caught within
Yes.
this general net.
Within the
But generally, this, the complaints about wanting to take things down is very little or negligible or non-existent.
We've already discussed the fact that, well, the internet is global and crosses many borders. How do we ensure Jersey's rules of takedown requests are effective when content is hosted overseas?
Well, that goes back to my previous answer about that's the work of the Office of the Information Commissioner to develop their own networks, both formal and informal. To do that, I myself spoke with an executive of Facebook during the Global Privacy Forum to say that it's really important from a small jurisdiction's perspective that these very large companies do listen to us and do act on our wishes in terms of takedown requests, etc. And my understanding to date is that we've generally been able to work with those large platforms where takedown requests have been needed.
I mean, we're not aware that they're not honouring their own terms of use. So you may be aware that Facebook, for example, has community standards. We're not generally aware that they're not honouring their own rules as such. And that, I think, is the first recourse. And it's, there's a general, I think in our own population, bearing in mind what I said about people not even putting parental controls on when they're allowing children access to these devices, there's perhaps a lack of appreciation of the internet. A JP commentator said it's like putting a child out into a dark wood, naked, full of predators.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
not actually answering the question at the moment,
Right.
though, is it? And I just want to say I expect you've both read all the submissions to the panel that we've received, because that does highlight and describe how parents are finding it very hard to manage this at the moment. Okay.
Yes, thank you. It's good to hear that you had made direct contact with some platforms.
Sorry,
because...
just to clarify, not me or my department, it's the Office of the Information Commissioner.
Oh, okay, thank you, Minister. Because our next question was because of their size and
Sorry, I spoke directly to Facebook.
Yeah.
Apologies, but that was a
Yeah.
one-off.
But we were questioning whether such large and wealthy platforms would they actually be, the results from those contacts be realistic in respect to takedowns? But you seem confident they would be.
Yes, and I remain in conversation with the Office of the Information Commissioner to ensure that they feel that they are getting the responses that they need from these platforms.
Excellent, thank you. What is the Jersey position in respect of the legal action currently being taken by Apple in an attempt to overturn a demand made by the UK government to view customer data?
And Jersey doesn't have a position on that because it's not involved in the court case.
Mm-hmm. There's no view on what you feel about that?
It with anyone.
Well, I will often view that in terms of cybersecurity, and that in the cybersecurity community, you have to question if you're going to create a backdoor. You know, what with the cost of that, because basically that can be exploited by bad actors as well. So I appreciate the alarm of Apple in terms of wanting to make things secure, and you know, watching the position with interest, because it is massively political. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks.
Chair.
So let's just go back to the question I was going to ask the Minister at the beginning. So this is quite a general question then. And with the opening paragraph, online harms refer to a range of negative experiences and risks that people can encounter while using the internet. So, Minister, based on your understanding of the current legislation, policy and cultural context in Jersey, please can you share what you consider to be the top 3 protections that children in Jersey currently have from online harm? So that's not about anything in development, it's what children have already.
Okay, so
From online
through,
harm.
it's interesting, through the Jersey Data Protection Law, Jersey is already amongst the jurisdictions with a high level of protection, or highest level of protection for personal data, including that of children. This was again recognised by the adequacy decision of the European Commission in 2024. As Deputy Scott has referred already, whilst a child under the age of 13 may not give valid consent to the processing of his or her personal data without parents' agreement, it provides young people above that age with full data rights, which includes the right for the erasure of their data below the age of 13. That falls to parents as well. You know, what we are doing in the work we're looking at is to further extend the data protection legislative framework to better exercise the rights of those data subjects, including children. And as Deputy Scott was talking about earlier, that's where we're looking for the appropriate proportionate legal framework in Jersey. That, of course, will give further protection. Importantly, data protection laws are based on the consensus of the person whose data is getting processed. And so data controllers or processors can't operate with a person's data beyond the purpose that they consented to. That's really important in situations where a young person is exposed to forms of pressure that are exerted online, but also where the threshold for legal prosecution has not been passed, or where the perpetrator remains anonymous. So we need to bear that in mind as we develop this law as well.
So currently, what's here currently? Data protection then?
There's data protection on our side, and on the, I was going to say, the Telecoms Law 2022 stipulates several offences for the improper use of telecommunication systems. And there's also child protection laws, which these fall under as well.
So these are all laws that you've referred to, rather than things like parental controls and privacy settings, education awareness, things like that.
They are also things, but I understood your question to be asking about the legal side.
And you were
And the
asking
top 3 protections that children in Jersey currently have from online harms, but you've mentioned 3 there. Okay. Could you explain the extent of the protections to children provided by the current data protection framework in Jersey? And I think you've actually just done that, really. Do you think that the current data protection framework is understandable for individuals and, you know, parents who don't have any prior knowledge of it? And I know that the office has been out to talk to children, so do you think it's understandable?
I mean, if you don't have prior knowledge of something, it's almost by definition impossible to know it. So it's, you know, for the people who, any law, it doesn't matter what the law, almost any law is complex. And the rights that come from any law, or responsibilities that come from any law, almost always need explaining to people. And so that is the constant and ongoing job of education that's really important. And as Chair, you've discussed yourself, or you've just mentioned yourself, the Office of the Information Commissioner spends a large amount of its time and its budget on education, both of adults and of children.
Yeah. So do you think that's sufficient then? Do you think people are
I think it's an
understanding?
ongoing, it'll never be sufficient in the sense that it's constant and ongoing. It needs to continue.
I think you can just point out the whole problem with getting engagement anyway, which of course we have now as states members in terms of getting voter engagement, that you can lead a horse to water but you don't make it drink. I've seen so many posts by the Commissioner and on the internet, on social media platforms that you expect to be used by parents, but sometimes people can be a bit casual and
There's no criticism of the office, it's just wondering if there's more that could be done. So.
That's
Can
why I
you
said about
measure it?
sufficient. It has to be ongoing. You can tell
And proportionate.
and proportionate, but it has to be continual and ongoing. There are always new generations of people who will need to learn these things, and there will also people, we forget what we were told 5 years ago, so it needs to be refreshed as well.
I like to think that people are getting a bit more savvy. I mean, I have a similar problem in cybersecurity because you've got an island where people leave their front door open, and I think they can do the same on the internet, and you can't, or at least not safely.
Okay, thank you then. So did you complete all your questions? So I'll continue to ask some questions, and this is about the scope of the online harm protection's work. So we understand that Jersey's laws relating to data protection relate to an individual's personal data. Will any of the work that the department is doing related to online harms protection include addressing exposure to more general inappropriate content online?
I mean, that's one of the questions, because it's interesting, because at the moment we don't have a framework for online censorship or moral assessment in place at the moment. Although criminal law stipulates what types of pictures are illegal, data protection focuses on the consent of the subject. Any provision that allows legal yet inappropriate content to be blocked or censored needs an island-wide discussion. One of the issues with the UK Online Harms Act was that it came up with this idea of legal but harmful and wanted to make kind of criminal offences around that. So it becomes very, very difficult, and I think actually flies in the face of established legal principles. So for that, I think we would need a more broad island-wide discussion. It's not something that a government should do in isolation.
There is already, I mean, when you talk about posting content, you've got the online, the platform provider that's actually allowing it to be posted, and there are the rules in place that allow things to be taken down. Plus, it's very much, the focus has to go to the jurisdiction in which that online provider is based, because really the laws that are enforced there. Then you actually have the person who posts it themselves. Now, we have had a really good look at the data protection law and whether it be appropriate to make every single person in this island a data controller. And, you know, the full, but we really don't, we believe that would be really overly onerous. So then it comes down to the way in which we seek to control the behaviours of individuals, and we do have criminal offences which are very much the remit of the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, and education. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the submissions, many of the submissions we've received refer to children seeing pornography, for example, on their phones, and there isn't anything to prevent that at the moment.
Well, there are ways. I mean, we respect the children have their phones, these phones. Remember what I said about the age in which you can enter a contract. JT do not. I mean, I think the age you can actually enter into a contract with JT is 18.
That's correct.
So parents are actually acquiring these phones for their children.
And
So your response is that it's down to parental responsibility.
I think because we know that schools already do have policies that to control the use of phones, but as soon as they're outside, it's a completely different environment. And I don't think you can say to government we should go into people's houses individually and enforce laws against them.
There is definitely an element of individual responsibility here. And when I say individual responsibility, in the case of children, certainly under the age of 13 or 14, that is definitely extended to parental responsibility. Deputy Scott, just earlier, I take the numbers at their word, said that 2/3 of internet devices or something were found, parental controls were not being implemented by the parents. So, and that is down to education, and as I said, but we know that there's a large amount of education going on. Obviously, that education is primarily, I believe, to the children themselves. So there might be a role to more directly interact with parents, but there has to be an acceptance that government cannot go into people's individual devices and should not, and that where children are concerned, but parents need to educate their own children, put on the appropriate parental controls, because if you have those appropriate parental controls in place, your children should not be seeing pornography on the phone.
Unless they see it on someone else's.
Well, yeah, but if they're a child, I'd assume a 13-year-old is speaking to other 13-year-olds.
I think there's a good point that you're making here. And by the way, I'm really glad that you're highlighting this because it's all part of educating the community.
Exactly.
But because I did speak to a parent about this, I've thought long and hard, where they were saying, well, you can't control what other people's children do. Then there was something about peer pressure about people having phones and things. And I did start thinking, well, if we're talking about the education of parenting, are we almost like thinking of something more fundamental about making parenting education compulsory itself? Because if you're trying to stop some other parent from allowing their child to have this content, maybe that's the route that you go down. But I'm not advocating that. But I think that logically you've got to deal with things at the right level and source.
Thank you.
I think as well, sorry, Chair, if I may, just very quickly, with regard to discussions and yes, where you might go, if you want to ensure that children are unable to access any inappropriate content on their own devices, then again another broad island-wide discussion we could have would be about whether possession of those devices under a certain age should be legal.
Yeah.
Should it be the case? And I believe some jurisdictions are looking at that under a certain age, the only type of phone you're allowed is one that does texting and calls only.
Okay.
Those are the sorts of discussions that we can have.
So in answer to that question about inappropriate content online, you've mentioned that you think there should be a island discussion before anything it could be done with legislation.
I think there has been discussion within government. It's just that...
No, I thought you...
Island-wide discussions,
Yeah,
what I'm saying about
island-wide
those things. I mean, if we want to legislate to the point of something like, not allowed possession of a smart device under a certain age, or
So
proposition that Deputy Scott was saying about parental education, things like this.
How do you think that island-wide discussion could take place?
It's always very difficult, but it's usually mediated through the media, through the States Assembly, and through, in the way that any island-wide discussion takes place.
And I think you're helping there.
And you've also thank you. And you've also mentioned about parental responsibility, and the possibility of parenting should have compulsory education as parents.
Well, I mean,
Deputy
I'm not
Scott said it was something that
I
could be
said
discussed. She didn't propose
it's
it.
all, when you actually look at options, if you like. But it's really not within my department even to be proposing that. It's just as you try and think about what could be done, and options to be considered. That's one of them.
These are the options that could be considered, but I don't believe these are the sorts of options that government should go it alone on. It would need to develop a broad consensus across the island society in order to go down
You'd
those
have to
roads.
have parents who are good parents going to, these classes, and it's like, well, how would they feel about it? But if you're in fact protecting another person's child by submitting to that sort of education, maybe, but that's the thing. It's a big community discussion.
It is, because there's also it goes beyond online harm. So some of the information, the kind of medical information that we're learning nowadays about the actual effect of smart devices on the development of brains, addictiveness, ADHD, things like this. So the question about actual possession of a smart device under a certain age, I think, becomes a more valid question, precisely because it's not solely the issue of what you're seeing on your device, it's actually also the effect of perfectly legal and normal use of that device on the device
itself.
Yeah. Now, my next question, I think you've answered, I don't know if you want to add to it, but how is Jersey addressing emerging online threats such as deep fakes and misuse of AI in the local context? And I know we had some...
Yeah, we've explained that if you've got an image and the person's still identifiable, then you can say that there's a misuse of personal data.
Yeah. Okay.
If they're not identifiable, then there isn't really a problem.
Great. And then, as part of the online harms protection work, are there any further legislative changes being considered to address privacy violations like identity theft, for example?
I don't believe that's part of this work.
Although I'm trying to just understand, when you say identity theft, are you talking, you know, if it's online, if it's still you could be misusing personal data, if, you know, impersonation and things like that are covered by online community rules. So I think it is covered, actually.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned, Minister, at the beginning that we already got some laws that are relevant to online and internet facilitated harms and cyberbullying in particular. And one of those is the Telecoms Jersey Law 2002. Can you explain to us how that particular law gives protection to individuals from online harm?
The actual mechanisms of that I'd have to probably know a little bit more about, but Article 51 of the Telecoms Law, I think Deputy Miles and I have discussed this in the past as well. It does say that a person who, by means of a telecommunication system, sends a message or other matter that is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene or menacing character is guilty of an offence. The provision then further stipulates that a person who, for the purpose of causing annoyance, inconvenience or needless anxiety to another, either sends by means of a telecommunication system a message that the person knows to be false or persistently making use of that system is also guilty of an offence. So there's a wide range, and they're all designed to protect individuals and children about using the systems themselves for illegal purposes and harmful purposes. The telecom security framework, which we're doing, have been adopting separately, seeks to secure the networks themselves, and that in itself, though indirect, gives an extra layer of security around what you can access.
Okay, thank you. Has any work been done to examine whether that particular article is still robust enough for a lot of the digital and the online offences around AI, for example?
Enforcement, I mean, really, it creates an offence, so I regard that very much as within the remit of the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. So I can't report how many people have complained about these offences, because as you can see, the onus is put on the individual that's using the system rather than the telecoms provider themselves, which is more within the remit of our department.
So the answer is so.
No, because
not
it's
something
not
that's
within
come
our
into your
The work
department.
we undertook for the parts of this subject matter that we're responsible for, we did analyse where we best should make these changes, and it was the data protection laws where we found it.
Thank you. We also understand that Jersey doesn't have any legislation that requires internet service providers to carry out blocking or filtering of illegal websites, as there is in the UK through the Digital Economy Act 2017. Is that something that's been considered by Jersey?
It's something I've talked through, actually, and I've had quite long conversations with officers about this, because you have to look at what's already available in the jurisdiction in which the internet provider is based, which, of course, you do have to enforce it in that jurisdiction. And generally, if there is a law available whereby you can do that, then your recourse is going to be under that. If you have our own personal law that says, right, there's an offence, and you go to that internet provider and say, well, under this jurisdiction, this is an offence. First sort of response, I actually did a lot of work as a lawyer in terms of international law and conflicts of different legal systems, is, well, does that really apply here? Can it be enforced? We do have some laws and treaties which allow things like the reciprocal judgments law, which allow judgments to be to be enforced abroad, but it's the result of quite a lot of treaty negotiations. So you've got to really look at the value that you're going to get out of adding that additional option in terms of our own, as opposed to what's already in the jurisdiction of the internet provider. And this is the key thing. We were not hearing complaints that the platform providers are not complying with their own rules. In fact, what I tend to hear are complaints that stuff has been taken down because of their systems, just almost like saying, oh, that's a bad post, and people saying, what did I do? What did I do? So we don't have the data that is actually saying, right, they're not actually complying with their own rules, and that they're, you know, that we contracted with them to.
So at the moment, then, it's not a practical consideration for ED.
I was going to say, so we have talked with internet service providers that had initial conversations around this issue, and I mean, there's no question, it is one of those things that yes, you can get them to block websites, but using a VPN, you get around that immediately. Equally, you can't, if you're blocking a website, that's one thing. What you're then unable to do, though, is block messaging sites. And so, you know, you can block WhatsApp, but you can't block particular parts of WhatsApp. So, and certainly where children are concerned, I think messaging sites and those sorts of social media sites are probably where you're going to see your problem. You know, if there is a problem the most, and that wouldn't be affected by this.
Yeah, you talked about VPNs. Is the use of VPNs a real challenge around this online harms to government?
To be honest, anything jurisdictional around the internet, full stop, becomes a problem because of virtual private networks.
And proxy IP addresses.
And proxy IP addresses, because you can basically pretend you're somewhere else in the world.
And to what extent are you researching that? Are you acknowledging that it happens, or are you actively looking to do something to prevent it from a Jersey perspective?
Personally, so from my perspective, ministerially, we're not looking to it happens, but there are perfectly good and valid reasons to use virtual private networks, which many people do, and so the idea of kind of prohibiting virtual private networks to me is a non-starter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, so there's some more questions from me now about the draft cyber security Jersey law. Minister, you've referenced that the development and delivery of the cyber security Jersey law is one of the ways the digital economy programme is supporting the online safety of citizens in Jersey. So with regards to any protection that the new cybersecurity law will provide from cyber attacks and theft of information, we understand the law will focus on protecting essential services. So can you clarify if or how it will provide protection to individuals from online harms?
The law is aiming to provide a coordinated response. I'm just trying to think about from your perspective, how it supports children. And I think that the easiest way to explain that is children are using devices that, as I've pointed out, their parents have allowed them to have access to or to use. Those devices are capable of being hacked by bad actors. And so we have to educate, I think, the parents in providing safe devices and safe systems. And so one of the things which the cybersecurity law does is create the Jersey Cyber Security Centre, which is there to assist people when they've got problems with what we call cyber incidents, but also to educate them in keeping systems safe. And bearing in mind what I have referred to in terms of parental controls not even being employed, I think we really do need to push that message through. Jersey we're very comfortable in our own homes, and we just don't realise that the internet's different territory, and we all have a role to help educate each other and be examples of what we call good, clean internet practice, best internet practice.
Okay, so some examples that are relevant to children that I expect would come under this law or could do. So cyberbullying, online predators, inappropriate content, privacy violations.
I think generally in terms of where the sources are as a result of things like malware and that sort of thing. So I would say when it comes to the cybersecurity law and its benefits, you can say it's indirect because it actually deals with some potential sources of online harm.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, that particular law is designed it's effectively a resilience law. Mm-hmm. It's about making sure that the island is secure and prepared against attacks on certain parts of its essential infrastructure.
And I would point back to the charity Internet Matters again, because it's quite interesting that they did their own research of children and asked about their views about whether they should, be deprived access to the internet and this sort of thing. And it's quite interesting how most of them didn't, and the reasons why. So I would just refer you to internetmatters.org, which I think is really good.
Because it is good, but we also have a lot of submissions as well to take
Yeah,
account of.
well,
So with the development of the new cybersecurity law, has any specific consideration been taken about the protections that the law could provide for more vulnerable citizens and children?
I don't believe so, because that's not the scope of the law. That's not where the law is focusing on. The law is focusing on effectively Jersey's cyber infrastructure.
But isn't the development of any new law, does that not, as corporate parents, mean that the effects on children have to be considered in the development of any
indeed,
Yes, but the law, the law itself is about Jersey's digital infrastructure, not about the content on that infrastructure.
So if you've got an internet system that goes down to support children, that could do them serious harm, like in the health department, in education. So it's really essential that we have good cybersecurity and do what we can to.
Of course, yeah.
I don't think cybersecurity. I mean, maybe the title's wrong. I don't know, but the cybersecurity law isn't, and what it's been designed for, isn't the sort of place you'd be seeking to put the protection of children from content in.
No, I get that. So I think because I started by saying the digital economy programme, say one of the ways that this is supporting the online safety of citizens in Jersey was with the cybersecurity.
Yeah,
Jersey
and
law.
as Deputy Scott explained, that's through that indirect means of
So not to take
by
account
keeping
of
bad actors out of the island.
not to take account of children in particular. Can you confirm the timeline for the introduction of the new law?
Where are we now?
May.
May.
So we're looking to finalise the drafting of that, and we're hoping to have that imminently. And then we were seeking to bring that draft piece of legislation to our scrutiny panel sometime in June to lodge, hopefully in July.
Okay. And could you confirm if the new cybersecurity Jersey law will include any particular standards for cybersecurity in schools, for example, firewalls?
Well, do you want me to say the cybersecurity law gives the Jersey Cybersecurity Centre the power to set standards, but how those are implemented down at the grassroots level will be through sites. So it would work with sites, and if there was a need to put in a minimum standard, then that's what they would do. But it would be in conjunction.
It's a
and
framework.
in collaboration.
It's a framework through which secondary legislation can be introduced. Side by side with that, we're actually working on a cybersecurity strategy that will be looking at importing general standards to be cybersecurity standards to be kind of adhered to within the community, which could or might not be supported by the secondary legislation. It's an ongoing development and policy.
Okay. Will the new cybersecurity legislation include any further provisions to address harmful activities such as online fraud or scams? And we know there's a lot of online fraud.
Through the education activities of the Jersey Cybersecurity Centre.
And their working relationship with SOJP and the educational awareness that they will have to do with our island-based regulators in terms of where cyber meets data protection through JOIC as well as through the JFSC and JCRA.
Of course, there's already legislation in place just through, which may mean that online scams are illegal. So all of that, the actual offences, they're dealt with through other already existing laws.
Yeah,
Like I say, this law is very much about the kind of setup of securing Jersey's digital infrastructure.
Yeah. So I asked if there were any further provisions to address these activities, but it's about education and working with the other organisations.
It's definitely part of the work of the Cybersecurity Centre. That is what they do.
Okay.
From an education perspective.
Okay, can you tell us whether the Jersey Cybersecurity Centre will receive any additional funding to support its work in 2026 onwards?
So
2026 budgets haven't been decided yet.
No,
But the provision
funding
for this year is over £1 million.
2025 funding was 1,028,000, and 2024 it was 942,000, and 2023 it was 920,000. And within that, you need to. I mean, it's not just the education. There's monitoring. I really would invite you to go down to the centre. Actually, it's quite impressive
I
how
was looking at their website.
Yeah, they've got screens showing attacks on systems, and that could include yours or mine.
And I was just looking at the funding because there was an overspend, wasn't there? So that's what we were wondering, if they would need additional funding for future years.
We remain in dialogue with the director, and we'll always take him into account, his views into account.
Okay, and is it expected to become an independent grant-funded
The
body?
cybersecurity law provides for its independence.
And that's also partly because obviously there's been some raised eyebrows in places because, you know, we're trying to, we're certainly not trying to increase the number of independent grant-funded bodies in government or around the government, but this was seen as needing to be independent because of the need for third-party organisations, whether it's businesses or charities or any other non-government organisation in Jersey, to be able to hand over their information, really kind of important confidential information about their systems and things like this to the Cybersecurity Centre without fear that government is a part of that.
Of course.
So that's where the independence, that's why we're still going ahead with an independent body, despite, in general, in government at the moment, we're trying not to create new independent bodies.
Okay, and do you know what impact this might have on the cost of government?
Well, that shouldn't increase the grant funding particularly beyond where we are, but it's also important. We recently signed an agreement, or the Cybersecurity Centre, we've recently signed an agreement with Guernsey for the Cybersecurity Centre to undertake work on behalf of Guernsey, and that's very much a contractual situation, but a really good one, and that would help mitigate costs.
Just to point out that this actually is, when we talk about budgeting, we're talking about security, we're talking about the island security, and if we actually compare how much we spend on our security compared to other jurisdictions, you'll find that actually our expenditure is quite shockingly low.
Okay, I think that's
interesting. Thank you, Chair. My questions now are going to be about the UK's Online Safety Act. You've already advised the panel about your reasons behind the decision not to pursue the permissive extent clause for the Online Safety Act. However, can you confirm if this decision was made on principle, or did any research and analysis back up that decision?
So it was, no, it wasn't made solely on principle at all. It was made as well because of what I would say were clear and glaring problems with the Online Safety Act. One of them I've mentioned already in this hearing was this idea of something legal but harmful, which was creating just through a single act in the UK government a new concept in law, which hadn't been discussed, hadn't been decided or proven. It was clearly, it famously runs through over 300 pages, the UK Online Safety Act. It was clear to me that it was overly complex. It required enormous bureaucracy. And so in itself, I still believe, and I'll come to the point where I believe I've been shown to be correct in my thinking, is it was always, in my view, going to be an unworkable law that would effectively be ineffective, but would make the government of the time feel good that it was doing something to supposedly protect children, protect people. Tick a box, exactly. It was a 300-page tick box exercise. So deeply improportionate for Jersey. But there are, from a general permissive extent clause perspective, any law that Jersey brings into its own body of law via a permissive extent clause is by definition a law that the states of Jersey cannot amend. Correct. So we would have been bringing a 300-page law into Jersey law that we would have no ability to amend as a States Assembly, and no authority even for Jersey to be able to, or any body in Jersey to be able to oversee the work of Ofcom, which would have effectively become a regulator on behalf of Jersey. So we would have outsourced our online protection and had no ability to engage with that outsource. So effectively no partnership agreement with this body, the UK regulator. So from my perspective, it was, whilst I am in general not keen on permissive extent clauses because the States Assembly is here to legislate for Jersey, there are times when permissive extent clauses are necessary. They're often technical. For instance, I've had to say yes to one with regard to Ofcom as well, but around regulation of streaming platforms, such as BBC iPlayer and things like this. But that's because from the broadcast media perspective, Jersey had already decided to follow the UK in using Ofcom to regulate that. And we had no way of having our streaming services, BBC iPlayer, etc., regulated unless I accepted the permissive extent clause. And so that was an existing situation that Jersey had already decided many years ago. This was a new situation. The law was not fit for purpose. And I think, it really interestingly, the annual Children's Wellbeing in the Digital World Index, which was published just early this month, they quote, and I will quote them, reveals that there has been no reduction in children's experiences of harm online since the introduction of the UK Online Safety Act. And that indeed children in the UK are finding it harder to navigate and recover from the challenges.
Is it not just still in development? It's not.
Yes,
No.
it's going to come out in stages. So I
Not
think
fully
that's
implemented.
No,
It's not
no.
fully implemented, but this is, so to quote, there has been no reduction in children's experiences of online harm.
No.
And children in the UK are finding it harder to navigate and recover from the challenges of the digital world. 2/3 of children in the UK say they experience harm online.
There's so much
So,
of it.
importantly, the Guernsey and the Isle of Man, who did say put a permissive extent clause in there, have chosen not to activate their permissive extent clause. And so from my perspective, I still stand by that decision, that the best thing Jersey can do is create its own laws that are the right scale for Jersey and use its own powers to protect children from online harm.
If I can add to that, because I agree, Chair, that there is secondary legislation that's come under the law and that's going to do more of the powers of Ofcom. But the thing to really point out in respect of that law is that it puts the onus on the platform provider again. And so we come back to this business of, well, would it make any difference us adopting it because the UK is regulating an internet provider? We're saying, oh yeah, you're doing it for us as well. I think, and I would suggest that it is much more helpful for us to look out on our own doorstep and just see what we can do, to actually go to an internet provider and say, we're Jersey and we want you to do this. You've got to be practical, you've got to look at the cost of doing that. And I do believe, and I really have an ambition for this community. We talk about, using technology, becoming much more, like digital leaders. And I think by actually us, each individual in this community, learning more about not just the advantages of technology, but the dangers of managing it, then we can be much stronger together as an island.
Yeah, and can I just ask something that you mentioned,
Of course, Chair.
because I didn't know this. You said Guernsey and Isle of Man have chosen not to activate their permissive
As I
extent clause.
understand it.
Do you know what their reasons have been?
No.
Oh,
We
okay.
might just be
All right,
waiting and seeing.
They might be waiting and seeing as
Yeah.
well, but as of today, so the UK Online Harms Act does not exist, has not been extended to the
Okay.
And I only
Guernsey and Isle of
speculate,
Man.
but if the UK is going to do this anyway, what value does it really add? They're going to do it. They're going to be saying to internet providers, well, you must do this, and this affects everybody. See what I mean?
What you're trying to say is we will benefit from
Yeah.
it to some extent anyway. Indirectly, and just by the provision, because Jersey will fall under the kind of UK, effectively the dialing code for the UK, then anything that's prohibited in the UK through UK law won't reach Jersey either, just because we're in the same parts of the system as they are. It's the easiest way to say it. But on top of that, we are then going to have our own laws. So we're going to have an indirect benefit from that, or anything the UK does to not to remove content, but to block content, to block access. All of that's going to happen to Jersey just because,
It's the umbrella effect.
the umbrella
isn't
of
it?
it. But then we are going to have our own law separate to that, which will be of direct benefit to islanders and will be amendable by the states of Jersey. So we will be able to respond to new technologies.
And
I think really importantly is what we're doing. The UK may have been first, but the UK first and worst in this case, I'm afraid. And the UK, we have the benefit of looking at other jurisdictions and how they're dealing with this. And so we are looking at New Zealand, we are looking at Australia, we are looking at European nations as well and how they're dealing with it. We're not just blindly following the UK down what in this case is a blind alley.
Okay. I mean, my next question involved asking you if there was an analysis of why we hadn't done that, but by the transcript of this meeting, Minister and Assistant Minister, I think we've had that explained.
I think I may have explained.
Very well indeed, so we thank you. May I, Chair, go on? During the public hearing on the 4th of October 2024, the panel asked a question regarding the potential risk of Jersey users being classified within a rest of the world category when accessing certain websites. And at the time, that wasn't known. Could you confirm whether any efforts have been made to assess that or establish a position on that?
Yeah, I'll ask officers. I don't know that we have established it finally.
It's very hard to establish in the total picture because each internet provider and each online platform manages their world classification in slightly different ways. So a total picture is very hard to get. Also, how people in Jersey access those platforms is also many and varied. So some people have a UK SIM card, so will be accessing it via Jersey internet providers when they are on Wi-Fi, but by UK providers when they're on 4 or 5G. So it's a very hard question to quantify.
But due to the umbrella effect that I was talking about earlier, certainly I believe experience of most islands at the moment is we continue to fall under the UK classification for most providers of any content on the internet.
Thank you for that. The UK's Online Safety Act has introduced the requirement for age verification to access porn sites. Will there be comparable legislation introduced in Jersey?
So at the moment we haven't been looking at that side of it. It's interesting because one of the things with age verification is that it also means you're giving away personal information straight away. Yeah. And so there's kind of a juxtaposition or even a paradox, you could say. And obviously we recommend to islanders to give away as little personal information as possible in general. Age verification systems for pornography sites usually require a face picture and a picture of the passport, which is actually the user's most private data. And that data could be used for scams and criminal activity. So there are issues around age verification. There's also a kind of social issue, which is that age verification systems can create a false sense of security for parents. And, if you go back many, many years before the internet, whether it was young people trying to buy alcohol or young people trying to buy magazines on top shelves, there was always young people trying to avoid age verification systems. That's part of growing up. That's the truth of it. And so age verification systems might, again, coming back to the discussion about parental responsibility, might give a sense of
a false sense
of security, exactly. And then there's also the VPN issue. Age verification systems get a VPN, they're free, they're, whatever, you can get one in a couple of clicks. So you're immediately pretending you're from a country that doesn't have an age verification system. So in short, that's not where we're looking at the moment.
Okay.
Don't provide any protection against material sent by messenger services.
And again, they don't protect, but yeah.
I think one of the, this comes up as a concern quite often because it's so much more unpleasant, nasty and violent than what was that around years ago.
Yes, indeed.
So
it is.
It's a big concern.
And again, I have to say that Europe and the UK, we will, and I bring Europe into that on purpose as well because I know they look down these roads as well, and so we're going to be caught on the umbrella. I think there's a reality is that the UK brings an age verification for pornography or any sites, pornographic sites, is anyone in Jersey wanting to access them is probably going to have to engage with that UK age verification system where we sit today. Yeah. That's the truth.
Minister, within your responsibility for online harms protection work as part of the Department for the Economy, what legislative changes, if any, are being considered to protect individuals from exposure to online content related to suicide and self-harm?
I don't believe we've done any piece of work which separates the types of online harm. I think we're looking at it as a whole, in one go.
And coming back to the separate piece of legislation, as I've explained, if you think about the terms of use of platforms again, which will allow posts to be taken down if they're harmful, that's the first port of call. I mean, almost in all these things, you look at where the internet provider's based, you look at what the contractual terms are that people are engaging on,
Jurisdiction.
and then our own legislation is building on that to say, well, we have got this right to ask for that in these things in certain circumstances. So I mean, we could look at what you're talking about is messaging in that case, and I think you do look at the terms generally for that. We've been looking more at the data protection, use of data piece, primarily with our additional work.
And my next question related to misinformation or disinformation. Is there any work? Is that a similar scenario?
I would love, honestly.
No,
You're right. Not as politicians. There is, in short, I don't think there is much work going on around misinformation, disinformation. Privately, this is a subject I personally spend an enormous amount of time thinking about. If as much as anything, because of where we're seeing it happening in the US, coming out of Russia into the Ukraine, things like this. So we are, as politicians, aware of the world around us, and we're seeing misinformation driving decision making around the world. And I spend enormous amounts of time thinking about it, but it's still no closer to thinking of any ways of actually dealing with it, except trying in vain, perhaps, to continue to insist that, facts are facts, opinions just opinion, dividing the two and saying the same thing.
I think it's very difficult to define misinformation and quite
It's really
what we
hard.
mean.
One person's misinformation is
I'll
another
give you an
person's
example.
truth. That's
Even
the
within this community, we have a politician who says about, politicians have voted in a certain way. They don't care about X. Now, I might say, well, that's misinformation because I do care about X, but there's a reason why I didn't vote in a particular way.
Very difficult to define.
Yeah, and in all of this, we have this whole freedom of speech piece and human rights and that sort of thing. So, and we have extra rights to, misinform apparently as politicians, which is that.
I mean, this is the best way. I am a liberal person. It's like I am liberal. I do believe freedom of speech. I do believe that we should have the freedom of the individual to choose things. When you accept those as important parts of society, it becomes really difficult to approach the misinformation question. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was just thinking from an atheist perspective, God is misinformation. From an atheist perspective, from a religious person's perspective, God is a truth.
And
Do you know what I mean? So that just highlights
if you
how
think
difficult it is.
about, the whole childhood culture, a lot of work has been done throughout the ages to try and teach children about misinformation. There's a story about Peter and the Wolf and all that sort of thing, because unfortunately, this is what happens in
Don't
the
mention
real world.
FC on camera, Deputy.
If the panel is interested in misinformation and disinformation, there is a very interesting report written by the Police Commission in the UK that looked at the impact of misinformation and disinformation during the riots that followed the murders of the young children in July, August last year. And that has some fascinating insights and recommendations. One of it is coordinating. How do you coordinate to be the central source of truth, and how do you keep that truth alive?
Alive, yes.
Because people want the truth here and now, so you've beyond the traditional ways of communicating in crises, like at 9 and at 5 at the beginning and the end of the day, and leaving the rest of the day unsupported. It's how do you keep that narrative continually going, so you are the single source of truth, and people at any one moment can get the up-to-date information from that single source of truth centre, and even if it is no news, but we're still working with it, and please don't take X, Y, Z. So I would recommend that as
a ministry.
is to
Yes.
provide
But-
that, and
Yeah.
whose role it is, because it's not the police's
But
role
again-
to be
I think
the
the
centre
Ministry of
information.
Truth is somewhat Orwellian.
That's exactly what's in my head. It's like, it's
Wow.
the trouble once you have a central source of truth, I
Yes.
guarantee you there'll be
Yeah.
a lot of work done to discredit that.
Oh, yes,
and,
absolutely.
You know, it will be,
Straight
by many
away.
people, the central
And they-
source of untruth.
And they also looked at the impact of the UK online safety bill in this space. So I can recommend it as an interesting read if you've got an hour or two to spare.
Yes, that would be good. We don't have a lot of time left, so I'm just wondering if we should skip some of our questions and send some to you as written
Of course.
questions. Just trying to have a quick look what might be best to ask now.
You're too good at answering questions, Minister. You'll have to dumb it down a
Yeah,
bit.
we've
Okay.
had good answers, yeah. So, while we think about it, if panel members think of anything in particular, I'll start asking these next questions about the legislation landscape. So how will the Government of Jersey ensure that any legislation it creates to address online harms will keep pace with the rate of change? Because it's really quite a difficult thing, isn't it?
I think number one is actually, it shows the importance that we need to have a digital policy unit and maintain a digital policy unit in Jersey.
Right.
Because it's through such a unit that we will be able to keep, have staff in the Government of Jersey who are able to constantly look at the landscape. So I think that's number one. We have a digital policy unit, we need to maintain that. The department, beyond that, we're already looking, so we are constantly doing landscape work. Elizabeth, Christoph and their colleagues are always looking at the legislative landscape. That's what we continue to do in different ways. And I think Elizabeth unintentionally just showed how she looks at the legislative landscape by talking about the report just 2 minutes ago. So it's a part of the team's work to constantly look at that landscape and feed that to us as ministers and future ministers, so they can then decide should any of it be brought into Jersey, or are there any things that we need to be aware of and so on.
I'd like to flag how much funding is being provided by the finance industry and businesses to promote awareness here, because when you think about JOIC itself, much of its funding comes from the fees of data controllers, which is actually funding these outreach activities, and no doubt you're looking into those combined with education generally.
Okay. I might skip to question 35.
Oh,
Um,
getting away
Because
with
we
murder.
have a lot of really good questions, but some of them would be suitable for writing.
When I was chair, I always found it really hard to get through.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
So, Minister, do social media and algorithms create a challenge in protecting from online harms? I mean,
Absolutely, and I think we said it twice, or Deputy Scott and myself said it separately, and this is one of the reasons is social media, particularly in terms of messaging platforms, they're websites within websites, and so they're incredibly hard to, we can't block them, for instance, and things like that. It becomes very difficult. Algorithms that, this in many ways goes back to the conversation we were having earlier. Algorithms are a massive problem from a misinformation perspective, from echo chamber perspective. They are fundamentally changing the discourse across communities.
Yeah.
That's a real problem. And the other side of it is they're dumbing us down. So I've thought of it this way, if you indulge me a second, was once upon a time we had to make our own choices about what we saw, what we didn't see, things like this. Now you've got to the point where we're not even looking around us to see what we might want to choose. So if you go onto a video streaming platform, you look at like my wife's profile for video streaming, I'll say Netflix is easier. What Netflix serves my wife and what Netflix serves me and what Netflix serves my daughter are three completely different things.
Totally, yeah.
And it means that you're never shown other things that you might be interested in, but the algorithm hasn't worked out you're interested in. So not only are we not choosing now, we're not even in an environment where we're able to choose and make our own choices. So I really worry, and this is kind of very much up the high level, I really worry about what it's doing to our brains and our minds.
It's bad,
It's
isn't
taking
it?
away
So,
our own agency. We're giving it up.
I know that
It's-
on Facebook I have a business account as well, which is to do with business totally separate from
Yes,
anything here. And on that, what comes in streaming to me is here you can meet this young girl from, you know,
Yeah.
Philippines or something,
Yeah.
and it's loads and loads of stuff like that. I don't get any of that on my personal
Sort of
Facebook
and
account.
then you're sitting there, exactly. So, and that will be because of the business element.
Yeah.
It'll just
Yeah.
be, you know, they're targeting business people.
Yeah.
I mean, sadly, I read an article very recently about artificial intelligence, and much like the internet, the kind of everyone thought it would be the perfect place for free speech and everyone sharing ideas, and actually it turned out it was mainly used for email spam and pornography. Artificial intelligence is going down the same road, where much of artificial intelligence capabilities are now being used just to create spam emails, spam adverts, and get you to click and marketing, and then not being used for the amazing things that artificial
I
intelligence
think
could be
it's,
used.
but I also would point out that, you know, many people do find, I know people, businessmen and the like, who are not on social media. I'm not even sure I would be on social media if I wasn't a politician. Because it's one massive distraction. I know, you know, people like, I think there's still about Elton John doesn't even, you know, has a basic phone because it's a distraction from being productive. And so I have this concern in terms of productivity generally about the distraction that you know, the internet causes. So, you know, so I guess there's just a general message that it is a choice. And the way in which you use it is a choice. Even in schools, we know that actually, you know, things like GPT, can be a really useful resource. We can find it a resource.
It can be content. Sorry, I apologise to you, Helen. I messed that bit. Do you want to ask that question, because that might be an interesting one?
It was just the impact on the economy. You've talked a lot about not going for online safety UK, etc. One of the cited benefits of the EU's Digital Services Act is that it makes it easier for providers of digital services to set up in Europe and adhere to one set of rules across Europe. Do you think that Jersey, having its own suite of legislation, could potentially act as a disincentive to companies setting up here?
I genuinely don't think so. Often actually having a point of difference from the big norm works the opposite way and gives you a competitive advantage. If our legislation was onerous in some way, you know, the implementation for the provider, for the digital business, if we were making it difficult for them to work in Jersey, then that would have an impact. But as long as our legislation is workable, then I don't see it.
And a lot of work has been done to ensure that we don't disrupt the cohesion and the supportiveness of our current data protection legislation, which is builds in very much with a format that's been approved by the EU. So one of the reasons not to amend the law to provide individual rights was that.
Actually, very quickly,
That's quite
sorry.
interesting.
It's going to very quickly is officers here, and Deputy Scott knows as well. My policy has been, since I took office, has been that we maintain Jersey's adequacy and with the EU data protection regime. I said that specifically, and I restated it last week, because we know that the UK through Brexit has talked about diverging from that regime. I believe the EU regime is probably the premium regime in the world, and therefore Jersey should adhere to that. We may be forced. I don't think we'll ever be forced. I think the UK understands that it has to also need to be adequate from an EU perspective. Were it to not become adequate, that might mean we need to think long and hard again. But at the moment, I strongly
stick
with
at this
the EU
point in
in
time,
terms of
there's
data
no
protection.
conflict in kind of policy direction
right,
between the path that with the path that you're taking.
That's it. And I think because the UK wants to make it easier and easier, as long as we don't follow the route, we'll probably continue to remain adequate in both the UK and the EU.
And I think just sort of
Well, I was going to say, we've got a few minutes. I wondered if you could ask 28, one of your questions.
this is about government policy and cross-department working. So obviously we've asked you today specifically around sustainable economic development. But we were told this morning by the Minister of Education that there is a cross-ministerial kind of body starting to form around this. So can you tell us what your role is on that kind of group and where that's going?
Do you want me to answer, because I was at last meeting, I'm
Yeah,
not sure
I
you
was
can
gonna
make it. Yes, we do have an online harms forum, which is across ministerial. I think the first time it met was back in September, October, Elizabeth. And the aim is to ensure we have a coordinated approach towards online harms. What are we doing in the different areas? And how are we going to deal with developments in that area? So we resolved that we will carry on meeting every quarter.
Is it a ministerial group?
Yes, it's minister and policy.
And who
officers.
chairs that?
Well, at the moment, it's like a kind of roving chair. We haven't really, decided that sort of patriarchal structure yet.
No one minister's been charged as chair.
Yeah, yeah.
And does that group have a relationship with the Safeguarding Partnership Board?
We haven't got a formal one. It's something that has been introduced. Elizabeth's going to have to remind me because we actually were given a whole load of stuff on the safeguarding part that's been done through children's ministers. So I mean there's that relationship in that way, and so we're being made aware of some, because I don't know if you're aware that there's a whole load of training that's been provided within government on safeguarding, and there's some of that's coming from some work with the NSPC, but it's not. I don't know. It's not.
Have you as a department had any contact with Safeguarding Partnership Board about the work that you're doing around online harms?
Not sure that we have.
Not specifically.
Not specifically.
Because bear in mind, what we are doing is not specifically for children. It includes the benefit of children, but
what we're doing is not just
safeguarding.
about children either. This is about, everybody in the
Safeguarding
community.
isn't
Yeah, the
just for children.
safeguarding isn't just for children. Yeah, I mean, online harm isn't just about children, it's about everybody.
no, it's a fair point to just. Perhaps we should, discuss a kind of way that should work.
Okay, I think we've asked all our questions in the hearing now, and we'll have some.
Just apologise for being late. It was only because
We
I think
could-
we could look
we
out
could
the window
see
and
it.
see
Yeah.
what I was doing.
We were wondering
Apologies.
whether to bang on the
I think that probably is the first time I've been late for the scrutiny session, so I apologise.
Yeah,
So, thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah.
thank you. That's almost like an algorithm we're all square about.